So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to paint transparent watercolor flowers in Procreate. The process here is pretty simple, and I'll show you how to create hard watercolor edges like this, along with a few other tricks for painting loose flowers. You can find the exact brushes I'm using here listed in the description. However, this video is more focused on the technique and less about specific brushes, so I think you can use anything you're comfortable with. So the first thing I recommend doing is making a rough sketch. And as you can see, I've already done it. I've just placed the sketch up here and set the layer to multiply, just so we can paint underneath it. And I'm going to start by painting the petals first. So for that, I'm going to use a kind of light pink tone like this. For the brush, I'm going to use the sharp round because it's pretty smooth. And I'm going to go through and do my best to sort of follow the sketch that I made. There we go. After that kind of initial pass, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, which is set to the fineliner pen, and I'm going to cut this back and smooth it out just so it matches my sketch a little bit better, because I did go way over the edges. After that, I'm going to turn off that layer, make another layer, and repeat the same process for each petal, just so they end up each on their own layer. After that, I'm going to go through and turn all the petals back on. And the reason I recommend doing it this way, basically filling them out roughly and then cutting them back to match the sketch, is because if you just use the brush to kind of freehand each petal, they might look all the same. So doing it this way just makes them look more unique. Next, I'm going to turn off the sketch, and I'm going to go through and use the warp tool here to bend each petal and kind of correct it a little bit. Generally, this looks really good, but as you saw, I had a gap in the middle. So mostly, I'm trying to fill that gap in. Next, I want to go through and adjust the opacity of each petal, just to make them all a little bit different. So to do that, I'm just going to open the Layers panel, and just lower them and raise them just like this, until it looks right. After that, I want to go through and give each petal a hard edge, and this is an effect that happens naturally with traditional watercolor. But of course, for digital watercolor, we need to add that in. So to do it, it's really easy. I'm just going to go through the petals one layer at a time. I'm going to start by using the selection tool set to automatic, and I'll just make a selection out here in the white area. After that, I'll feather it out just a little bit. There we go. Then I'll go to my curves adjustment, and if I set it to gamma, I can grab this blue node and just move it towards the right. And you can see here, it gives it a sort of dark edge effect. And I'll show you it again on some of the other petals. But while I've got this petal selected here, while the layer it's on is selected, I want to show you how to do one more kind of shading effect. This time though, I'm going to use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just select some random areas along the edges. I'll circle back, just so it's kind of a U shape like this. Then I'll feather it out a little bit. And I'll do the same thing with the curves adjustment and just darken those kind of edge areas that I selected. Now I don't want to do it too much. I think that looks pretty good. And then once this petal is finished, I can move on to the next one. I think I'll do this one next. Maybe it's easier if I turn the other ones off that I'm not working on. And we just focus on this one. So once again, I'll grab the selection tool, set it to automatic. I'll just select the white area around it, feather it out, curves, move the node to the right, and that gives us that kind of initial dark edge. After that, I'll go in there again using the freehand selection tool and just select a couple of areas on the edges. I'll feather those out as well and darken them the same way. And I'm going to repeat this process on each petal. And there we go, that looks pretty good. Before I move on, I want to double check that the petals look different enough. I think in this case, they look all the same, like in terms of the transparency. So I'm going to adjust that a little bit to make them more different. I think when I did this earlier, I didn't quite do it enough. There we go. And once I'm happy with how all these look, I'm going to merge all the petals together onto one layer. Next, I'm going to move on and do some blending. So for that, I'm going to grab the water blender brush. And I'm just going to use this quite a bit in the center area here, and then also occasionally on some of these outer edges. I just don't want to blend it too much. Now it's going to depend on what kind of flower you want to paint, but I usually like it if the center is a little bit darker than the edges. So if you want to darken the center, I recommend just making a layer above the flower. Using your original flower color again, I'm going to use the same sharp round I used earlier as well, and I'll just paint it on this area. Then I'll go to Gaussian blur and soften it up. Then I'll set this kind of blurred layer here to multiply. And once I'm happy with how it looks, I'll merge it together with the flower. If you want the outer edges of the petals to be even lighter, I recommend using the curves adjustment on that. So to do that, I'll grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and I'll just select the areas I want to be lighter. I'll circle back and feather it out. Then I can go to my curves. And remember, we drag the node this way to darken it. Since I want to brighten it, I'm just going to drag it up. And at this point, this part of the flower could be finished, but there's two kind of easy details I want to show you really quickly how to add. The first one is, I want to show you how to make it look like the edges of the petals are sort of curling up. So to do that, I'll make a blank layer above my flower. I'm going to grab the abstract round this time because it's a little bit rougher. Same flower color we used in the first place. And I'm just going to draw a kind of like a very light pressure. Then I'll press harder and then light again. And I'm just following the edge of the flower petal. After that, I'm going to grab the water blender. And at kind of a medium size, I'm going to push this back until I can start seeing the petal kind of show through. There we go. After that, I'm going to set this layer to multiply. And then I'll mess with the opacity here just to lighten it up. I think that looks pretty good. And then I'll just pinch it together to merge it with the original flower layer. And as you can see, it adds a nice kind of subtle curling effect. And I think I'll do it again over here. Maybe this one looks good. So once again, I'll make a blank layer above the flower, abstract round, and I'll just make a stroke that follows the edge of the flower like this. There we go. Water blender, and I'll use it to kind of push this edge back. After that, I'll set this layer to multiply, and then adjust the opacity to make it more subtle. And the last detail I want to show you is how to add some kind of speckles in the center. And because this is a pretty minimalist drawing, I'm going to make the speckles the same color as the flower, just a little bit darker. So I'll make a layer above it. I'll choose a darker version of my flower color. I'll use the stippling brush in this watercolor kit, and I'll just dot this around like this. Then to make it more visible, I'm going to set the transparency mode of this layer to multiply. And then once again, I can adjust the strength of this by lowering the opacity. And at this point, we can move on and do the stem, but I actually forgot there's kind of one more trick I want to show you. I'm going to show you how to apply a sort of random color shift effect. So to do that, I'll grab the freehand selection tool. I'll just make a random selection like this. I'll reconnect it. I'll feather it out quite a bit. Hue, saturation, and brightness. And I can change the hue of the area that we selected just by moving the slider. So I'm going to make it look a little bit more, I think either yellow or kind of purple. I think purple looks good. That looks pretty good. And you could do this a few more times if you wanted to introduce kind of other secondary colors. But again, this is a pretty minimalist illustration, so I think I'll leave it like this. And finally, once the flower is totally finished, we can move on and paint the stem. And that's going to be on a blank layer above the flower. I'll use a sort of medium olivey green tone. And you could use any brush you want for the stem, but personally, I really like this brush here in the inking tab called Mercury. I think it just has a really nice kind of smooth effect. And I'm going to use this to rough out the stem. Now up here, you can see I painted it a little bit wider where it meets the flower. And if you do it that way, I recommend using the eraser brush to kind of clean up that point so it looks like it's going inside the petals. There, you can see it looks like it's kind of in front of this back petal and then going in there just between those two. For the stem, I also recommend adding a sort of color shift like we did for the flower. So again, I'm going to do that with the freehand selection tool. I'm just going to select the top of the stem and feather it out, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll try to change this to a sort of purpley tone. There we go. I just think this sort of ombre transition looks really nice. And for the leaves, those are super simple. I'm going to do them on the same layer as the stem, but this time I'm going to go back to the watercolor brushes and I'm going to use the hard edge brush. And I'll just do some stroke-based leaves. So basically, I'm just going to start with some very light pressure. I'll press harder and then taper it off. And that's kind of just one leaf. I want to do another one here, but I think it'll look nicer if it's darker. And in this area here where it's sort of overlapping, I recommend just blending that until it disappears. So to do that, I'll grab the water blender and I'm going to use it at a really small size. And I'll just try to kind of smear away the stem color so it's covered up by the leaf. And often this happens when you paint with traditional watercolor on paper. Basically, where you have a lot of strokes coming together and ending, you might end up with some darker pigment there where there was just more water. So to get that effect, I'll grab the freehand selection tool, I'll circle that area, feather it out, and I'll darken it using the hue, saturation, and brightness. And just like that, this simple transparent flower is finished. If you think I've earned it, please give this video a like. And here are two... Did you water it?
I'm watering.
Almost done, almost done. Just 5 minutes, okay? Anyways, if you think I've earned it, give this video a like. And here are 2 more tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.